I almost turned the car around when the road narrowed to a single strip of gravel, and the trees closed in on both sides like they were trying to erase it. Up until that point, the drive had been ordinary enough. 2 hours out of the city, a stop for gas, a bad coffee, the kind of quiet anticipation you get when you convince yourself that isolation is the same thing as peace. But Northwind Mountain didn't feel peaceful. It felt removed, like the rest of the world had ended a few miles back and just hadn't told me. The listing had called it a remote, restorative cabin experience. That phrasing should have been my first warning. People don't say restorative unless something is broken. Still, the photos looked convincing. A small wooden cabin perched near the tree line, wide windows, a stone chimney, clean interior, minimal but comfortable. The reviews were almost identical in tone. Quiet, reset, exactly what I needed. Nobody mentioned anything unusual. Nobody ever does. I booked it 3 days after my brother stopped answering my calls. That's not the kind of detail you put in a listing description, but it's the kind that gets you to click reserve at 2 in the morning. I told myself I needed distance, space to think, somewhere without noise or reminders, or people asking questions I didn't want to answer. Northwind Mountain offered all of that. It just didn't mention the cost. About 10 miles from the cabin, I passed a sign posted on a leaning wooden stake at the side of the road. The paint was faded to the point of almost disappearing, but I slowed enough to read it. Northwind Access Road, no maintenance beyond this point. Travel at your own risk. Below that, carved directly into the wood, deeper and sharper than the painted letters. If you arrive after dark, do not continue. I checked the time on the dashboard, 4:12 p.m. Sunset wasn't for another hour and a half. Plenty of time. I kept driving. The paved road ended gradually, like it just gave up trying. Asphalt turned to cracked tar, then to loose gravel, then to packed dirt. My phone lost signal about 5 minutes later. Not low signal, not 1 bar, just nothing. The map froze, then disappeared entirely, leaving me with a blank grid and a blinking dot that didn't seem connected to anything real. I didn't turn back. The forest changed as I climbed. The trees grew taller, thinner, spaced closer together. Birch and pine mostly, their trunks pale and vertical like ribs. There was no underbrush, no birds, no insects. Even the sound of the engine felt muted, like it didn't belong here. I rolled down the window to test it, expecting wind or at least the low hum of the forest. There was nothing. Not quiet. Not silence the way you get in a closed room. This was something else. Like the absence of sound had weight to it. Like the air itself was holding its breath. The cabin appeared without warning. One moment there was nothing but trees, and the next, the road opened into a small clearing carved into the mountainside. The cabin sat at the center of it, exactly like the photos, and somehow completely different. Same structure, same shape, but in person, it felt deliberate. Positioned rather than placed, like it had been put there for a reason that wasn't mine. I parked about 20 feet from the porch and turned off the engine. The sudden stillness pressed in immediately. No ticking metal, no wind, no distant movement. Just that same heavy, waiting quiet. The chimney caught my attention first. Smoke was drifting from it in a thin, steady line, dissolving into the gray sky above. Not a lot, just enough to suggest a fire had been burning recently. But the listing had said the cabin hadn't been used in weeks. I stayed in the car longer than I needed to, long enough for the silence to feel intentional, long enough to notice that the smoke never changed direction, even slightly. It rose straight up, unaffected by anything. Eventually, I grabbed my bag and stepped out. The ground felt solid under my boots, but there was a strange give to it, like the top layer of soil wasn't entirely settled. I told myself it was just damp from recent weather. I told myself a lot of things in those first few minutes. The porch creaked under my weight as I approached the door. There was a key, exactly where the listing said it would be, tucked under a flat stone beside the frame, cold to the touch. The door itself was heavy, reinforced with a horizontal beam that looked newer than the rest of the structure. That stood out to me. Not enough to question it, just enough to notice. What I didn't expect was the paper. It was pinned at eye level, centered perfectly on the door. Not taped, not loosely attached. 4 small nails, one at each corner, holding it flat against the wood. The paper was thick, almost like cardstock, covered in clear laminate that reflected the dim light. At the top, in clean printed text, rules for overnight guests. Northwind Mountain cabin. I actually smiled when I saw it. It felt like a theme, a gimmick, the kind of thing rental owners do to make the experience more memorable. Spooky cabin with rules. I'd seen worse marketing ideas. I leaned in and started reading. Keep the fire burning at all times after sunset. If it goes out, relight it immediately. Do not allow the cabin to go cold. Do not open the door between the hours of 10 p.m. and 4 a.m., no matter who knocks. If you hear movement on the roof, remain inside and do not investigate. Avoid looking directly out of the windows after dark. Reflections are not reliable. Do not consume anything that was not brought with you. If you hear your name spoken from inside the cabin and you are alone, leave immediately through the front door and do not look back. You may notice footprints around the property in the morning. Do not follow them. If the fire burns blue, extinguish it and leave the cabin immediately. I read the list twice, then I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so specific that it stopped feeling real. Whoever wrote this had committed to the bit completely. It had structure, escalation, even a final rule that felt like a payoff. It was impressive. I pulled the key from under the stone, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The warmth hit me first. The warmth wasn't subtle. It felt maintained, intentional, like someone had been feeding the fire not long before I arrived. The air carried that dry, clean scent of burning wood, layered over something older underneath, something faintly metallic that I couldn't place right away. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, the latch settling with a heavier sound than expected, more final than functional. The cabin interior matched the photos in layout, but again, not in feeling. Single main room, wood stove at the center, a couch against the far wall, a narrow table, a chair pulled slightly too close to the stove, like someone had been sitting there recently and never bothered to push it back. To the left, a small kitchen area. To the right, a short hallway leading to what I assumed was the bedroom and bathroom. Everything looked clean, not staged clean, used clean. That was the second thing that didn't fit. If no one had been here in weeks, the air should have felt stale, closed. Instead, it felt circulated, warm, lived in. I set my bag down near the table and walked to the stove. The fire inside burned steady and low, orange and consistent. The kind of burn you get when it's been properly maintained over time. Not recently started, not neglected. I opened the small metal door and added one of the logs stacked neatly in the crate beside it. The wood caught almost immediately, like it had been waiting for it. Rule 1 surfaced in my mind without effort. Keep the fire burning. Sure, I said out loud, mostly to fill the space. That one makes sense. My voice sounded strange in the cabin, not echoed, not muffled, just slightly off, like the room absorbed it unevenly. I moved to the kitchen area next. There was a sink with a manual pump, a small propane burner, and a set of cabinets beneath the counter. One of them, the lower one on the right, had a thin black line drawn across its handle. Not paint. Marker maybe. Intentional. I stared at it for a second, then crouched and opened it. Inside were cans, soup, beans, some kind of packaged meat. All neatly arranged, all unopened. The labels looked older than they should have been, slightly faded, edges worn in a way that didn't match the otherwise maintained feel of the cabin. Rule 5. Do not consume anything that was not brought with you. I closed the cabinet. Okay, I said again, quieter this time. Also fine. I told myself it was part of the experience, a curated isolation. You bring your own supplies, rely on yourself, disconnect. The rules reinforced that idea. They gave structure to the solitude. That explanation held for about 3 minutes. Then I noticed the windows. There were 4 in the main room, 1 on each wall except the one with the door. Large, rectangular, positioned at eye level. In the daylight, they showed nothing but trees. Close ones, too close. I hadn't noticed that from outside. The clearing I'd parked in didn't extend as far around the cabin as I thought. The trees pressed in on 3 sides, their trunks only a few feet from the walls, branches stretching overhead in a way that filtered the light down into a dull gray wash. It made the interior feel dim, even though it was still late afternoon. I stepped closer to the window facing north and leaned slightly to get a better angle. For a moment, I thought the glass was dirty. Then I realized I was seeing my own reflection. Not clearly, not like a mirror. Just enough to register movement and shape layered faintly over the trees outside. Reflections are not reliable. I leaned back. That's a bit much, I muttered. Still, I didn't feel afraid, not yet. Uneasy maybe, curious definitely. But there was a distance between me and the situation, like I was observing it rather than part of it. That distance didn't last. I checked my phone out of habit. Still no signal. The time read 5:02 p.m. I did the math automatically. Sunset soon, temperature drop after, mountain conditions. The fire mattered. That part at least was grounded in reality. I unpacked my bag. Food first, water, a flashlight, extra batteries. I lined everything up on the table with a kind of methodical focus that felt reassuring. Normal actions in a controlled space. I avoided looking at the rules sheet, which I had set down beside the table when I came in. Not intentionally, just I didn't feel the need to read it again. That changed when I heard the first sound. It came from above. A soft, deliberate shift, not a scurry, not random. A single movement, like weight adjusting carefully across wood. I froze, head tilted slightly upward. Nothing followed. I waited. 5 seconds, 10, then another sound. Same place, same controlled movement. On the roof. Rule 3. If you hear movement on the roof, remain inside and do not investigate. I exhaled slowly through my nose. Squirrels, I said, or something. It didn't sound like squirrels. It sounded heavier, slower, intentional in a way animals usually aren't. The movement crossed from one side of the cabin to the other, in a straight line. No scratching, no scrambling, just steps. Then it stopped, directly above me. I stayed where I was, standing beside the table, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. Another 10 seconds passed. Then, very gently, something tapped once on the ceiling. Not loud, not aggressive, just enough to be unmistakable. I looked at the door, then back at the ceiling, then at the rules sheet. I didn't move toward any of them. Stay inside, I said quietly. Right, fine. The light outside shifted as I stood there, the gray dimming toward something darker, flatter, the kind of transition you don't notice until it's already happened. I walked to the stove and added another log. The fire flared briefly, brighter than before, casting sharper shadows along the walls. For a second, the entire room seemed to pull into contrast, every edge more defined, every corner slightly deeper. Then it settled. I sat in the chair by the stove. That felt like the right place to be. From there, I could see the door, the windows, the hallway, everything that mattered. The ceiling remained silent. Whatever had been up there either stopped moving or moved away. I told myself it had moved away. I stayed in the chair as the last of the daylight drained from the windows. The reflections came with it. Slow at first, faint overlays of movement that didn't quite match mine, then stronger, more defined, until the glass stopped functioning as a window entirely and became something closer to a dark, imperfect mirror. I kept my eyes on the fire. Rule 4 repeated in my head, unprompted this time. Avoid looking directly out of the windows after dark. Reflections are not reliable. Yeah, I said softly. I'm starting to get that. The cabin shifted as night settled in. Not physically. The structure didn't move, but the space felt different. Smaller somehow. Like the walls had drawn in just slightly, tightening around the heat of the stove. I checked the time again. 9:18 p.m. Less than an hour before the next rule mattered. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, watching the fire burn steady and strong. Behind me, one of the windows reflected the room back in muted, warped detail. For a brief moment, I thought I saw something move in it that didn't match the fire. I kept my eyes on the fire longer than necessary, not because I was afraid to turn, but because I understood, quietly, instinctively, that looking would change something. Up to that point, everything still existed in a space where it could be explained, dismissed, or at least postponed. The second I confirmed something I couldn't rationalize, that space would disappear. So I didn't look. The clock on the wall above the kitchen read 9:42 p.m. The ticking was subtle but present, a steady mechanical rhythm that gave the room a sense of order it didn't deserve. I focused on that sound instead, counted seconds, measured time in small, controlled pieces. At 9:58, I stood up and added 2 more logs to the fire. Not because it needed it, because the rule did. Keep the fire burning at all times after sunset. The flames rose higher this time, catching quickly, pushing heat outward in a way that made the air shift against my face. The shadows along the walls stretched and bent, moving in slow, uneven patterns that felt just a little too deliberate to be random. 10 o'clock came without ceremony. Nothing happened immediately. No knock, no sound, no sudden change. Just the same room, the same fire, the same quiet. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Okay, I said under my breath. That one might just be for effect. I shouldn't have said that. The knock came 3 minutes later. It was soft. So soft that if I hadn't been listening for something, anything, I might have missed it entirely. A single, controlled tap against the door. Not the kind of knock you use to get attention, the kind you use when you already know someone is there. I didn't move. The second knock came after a pause. Same placement. Eye level. I felt my shoulders tense without meaning to. Occupied, I called out automatically. The word left my mouth before I could stop it. Silence followed. Then, from the other side of the door, a voice. Hey. It was a man's voice. Calm. Even. Close enough that there was no distortion from distance. You mind opening up? Every part of that sentence was wrong. Not the words themselves, the delivery. There was no strain in it, no urgency, no explanation for why someone would be standing outside a remote cabin halfway up a mountain in the middle of the night. Just a request. I stared at the door. Rule 2, do not open the door between the hours of 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. no matter who knocks. I'm not supposed to, I said, more to myself than to him. A brief pause, then the voice again, slightly closer now. I know you're in there. That landed differently. Not threatening, not aggressive. Certain. I felt something shift in my chest. Not fear exactly. Recognition. The tone of someone who isn't guessing. I just need a minute, he continued, that's all. I didn't respond. The handle moved. Not turning. A slow test. Like someone checking whether it had been locked properly. I watched it carefully. The latch held. Another pause, then softer this time, almost conversational. "It's getting cold out here." My eyes flicked to the fire instinctively, then back to the door. "That's not my problem," I said, louder than before. The words sounded harsher than I intended. Silence. A long one. Long enough that I started to think it was over. Then, "Are you alone?" The question slid under everything else. Not louder, not closer, just different. I didn't answer. The silence that followed stretched out again, but this time it felt heavier. Less like waiting, and more like listening. After about a minute, I heard it. Not from the door, from the side of the cabin. A slow dragging sound against the exterior wall. Not scratching exactly, more like something being pulled across the wood with steady pressure. It moved from left to right, then stopped, then started again, circling. I turned my head slightly, just enough to track it, without looking directly at the windows. The sound passed beneath one of them, paused, then continued. Rule 3 echoed again, overlapping with Rule 4 now. Stay inside. Don't investigate. Don't look. The dragging sound reached the back wall, then the far side, completing a full loop around the cabin. It didn't stop. It started again. Same pressure. A second circuit. Then a third. Each pass slower than the last. Like whatever it was had already learned the shape of the cabin and was no longer in a hurry. The knock didn't return. The voice didn't speak again. But the presence didn't leave. It just repositioned. The dragging stopped at the front door. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then something brushed lightly against the wood. Not a knock, not a push. Contact. I stared at the handle again. It didn't move. But I could feel it now, even without seeing anything. The awareness of something directly on the other side of a barrier that suddenly felt very thin. "Just a minute," the voice said again. Same tone, same calm delivery. Closer. I stepped back, not quickly, not panicked, just enough to create space. "No," I said. The word felt more solid this time, more certain. There was a pause. Then, "Okay, no change. Acceptance." And then, just like that, the pressure on the door disappeared. Not gradually, instantly. The air in the room shifted with it, like something had been removed that I hadn't fully registered until it was gone. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. Nothing. I didn't move toward the door. I didn't check. Instead, I turned slightly, keeping my eyes low, and added another log to the fire. It caught quickly again, flames rising, pushing warmth back into the room. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then I noticed the reflection. Not in front of me, behind, in the window I had been avoiding. I saw the fire first, then the chair, then myself standing slightly off-center. And behind me, something near the door. I didn't turn, I didn't breathe. I watched it in the reflection. It wasn't clear, not fully formed, more like a distortion in the shape of a person, standing too still, slightly taller than it should have been. It wasn't facing the door. It was facing me, from inside the cabin. My stomach dropped. Rule 6 surfaced, sharp and immediate. If you hear your name spoken from inside the cabin, and you are alone, leave immediately through the front door and do not look back. As if on cue, Daniel. My name. Behind me, not from the door, from inside the room. Exactly where the reflection said it would be. I closed my eyes for a second. Just one, then opened them again. The reflection hadn't changed. It was still there, waiting. For a second, I didn't move. Not because I was frozen, but because I understood exactly what the next few seconds were going to decide. Up until now, every rule had been something I could follow passively. Stay inside. Don't open the door. Don't look. But this one required action. Leave immediately. That meant turning around. That meant moving toward the door. That meant walking past whatever was standing behind me. My reflection didn't shift. The thing behind me didn't move. Daniel, it said again, softer this time. Closer, not loud enough to echo, not distant enough to ignore. I exhaled slowly and kept my eyes fixed on the window. If I turn around, I said quietly, you're still going to be there. No response. That was answer enough. I took one step backward, then another, keeping my body angled toward the fire, using the reflection as my only reference point. The distance between me and the door closed inch by inch. The distance between me and it did the same. It didn't rush. It didn't lunge. It adjusted, always staying just behind me, matching, waiting. I reached the door with my left hand, fingers brushing the cold metal of the handle. The reflection shifted slightly as my position changed. For a fraction of a second, I saw more of it. Longer limbs than mine, shoulders set too high, head tilted at an angle that didn't match the spine. I didn't look directly. I didn't need to. My hand closed around the handle. Don't, it said. The word landed differently than the others. Not calm, not neutral, almost curious, like it wanted to see if I would hesitate. I didn't. I pulled the door open and stepped through without turning around. The cold hit immediately. Sharp, immediate, real. The kind of cold that clears your head in an instant. I stepped onto the porch and kept moving, down the steps, into the clearing. Do not look back. I focused on the ground in front of me, on the uneven patches of dirt, the scattered stones, anything that kept my eyes forward. Behind me, the door remained open. I could feel it, not hear it, feel it, like an absence in the air. Daniel, the voice again, now from the doorway, closer than before. I kept walking. 10 steps, 15, 20. At the edge of the clearing, I stopped. Not because I meant to, because something in front of me made me. The trees. They were closer. Not just close, wrong. The spacing had changed. When I arrived, there had been at least 15 feet between the cabin and the tree line. Now there was maybe 5. The trunks stood tighter together, their pale bark catching what little light remained, forming a kind of wall that hadn't been there before. I stared at them, trying to process it. Behind me, I heard the door close, softly. No force, just a quiet, deliberate shut. I didn't turn. Good, the voice said. Not from the door, not from the cabin, from somewhere behind me in the clearing. Closer than it should have been. I felt my chest tighten. The rule didn't say anything about what happened after you left. Only that you had to. I took another step forward. The trees didn't move. They stayed exactly where they were, blocking. I turned slightly to the left, scanning for a gap. There wasn't one. Every direction looked the same. Dense, closed, impenetrable. The clearing was gone, replaced. Daniel, this time it came from my right. Different position, same distance. I turned my head just enough to register movement in my peripheral vision. A shape, standing where the side of the cabin should have been. But the cabin wasn't there anymore. I felt that before I confirmed it. The absence. The heat from the fire. Gone. I turned fully. The cabin was still there, but farther away. At least twice the distance it should have been. The proportions were off. The angles wrong. Like I was looking at it through something that bent space instead of light. And in front of it, something stood in the doorway. Same outline as before. Now clearer. Too tall. Too still. Watching. Come back inside, it said. The voice had changed. Still mine. Pulled thin in places it shouldn't be. I shook my head slowly. No. The word felt small out here. Unprotected. The cold pressed harder against my skin. Not just temperature. Pressure. Like the air itself had weight now. I looked back at the trees, then at the cabin, then at the ground, trying to find something that made sense. Something stable. My eyes landed on footprints. Fresh ones. Pressed into the dirt between me and the cabin. Not mine. Too large, too deep, and leading in a direction that didn't exist. They started near the porch and continued past where I was standing, into the space between the trees. Rule 7. You may notice footprints around the property in the morning. Do not follow them. It wasn't morning. That didn't seem to matter. The footprints were there. Clear. Deliberate. Waiting. Just a minute, the voice said again. Closer now. I didn't look up. I didn't look at it. I focused on the ground, on the prints, on the direction they suggested. Then I stepped backward. One step, then another. Back toward the cabin. The cold eased slightly with each step. Not gone, just less. Behind me, the presence shifted. I could feel it adjusting again, matching, staying aligned. I reached the base of the porch, paused, then stepped up. The wood creaked under my weight, exactly as it had before. Solid, real. I moved to the door. My hand hovered over the handle. The rule hadn't said anything about re-entering, only leaving. I glanced to the side. Just a flicker, enough to see the edge of it, standing inches away now. Close enough that if I turned fully, I would be face to face with it. I didn't. I grabbed the handle and pulled the door open. Warmth spilled out immediately. Real warmth. Fire warmth. I stepped inside and shut the door behind me, without hesitation. The latch clicked. The air shifted. The pressure eased. I stood there for a second, breathing. Then I turned. Slowly, carefully. The room was empty. The chair sat where I left it. The table. The cabinets. Everything exactly as it had been. No distortion. No extra presence. Nothing behind me. I walked to the center of the room and stopped. My hands were shaking now. Not violently, just enough to notice. I looked at the window. My reflection stared back. Alone. Normal. Moving when I moved. I exhaled slowly. Okay, I said. My voice sounded like mine again. I glanced at the clock. 12:14 a.m. 2 hours down, almost 4 to go. I turned back to the fire and added another log. It caught quickly. Too quickly. The flames flared higher than before. For a brief second, they shifted color. Not fully, just at the edges. A faint tint. Almost blue. I saw the color shift before I fully processed what it meant. It wasn't dramatic. Not a full change. Just a thin edge along the base of the flames. A faint blue line threading through the orange like something underneath was trying to surface. For a second, I told myself it was normal. Different wood, airflow, chemicals in the bark. Then Rule 8 came back, clear and exact. If the fire burns blue, extinguish it and leave the cabin immediately. I didn't move right away. That hesitation almost cost me. The blue spread slowly, not outward, but upward, climbing through the flame in narrow streaks that didn't behave like fire should. It didn't flicker the same way. It held shape for too long, like it had weight. I stepped closer to the stove, crouching slightly to get a better look. That was a mistake. The moment I leaned in, the flame reacted. Not violently, not explosively, but deliberately. It bent toward me. I felt the heat shift against my face, sharper now, focused. And underneath it, cold. The same cold I had felt outside. Inside the fire. I stumbled back immediately, heart kicking harder now, adrenaline finally cutting through whatever calm I had been holding onto. Okay, I said under my breath. Okay, that's real. The blue was no longer subtle. It had taken over most of the flame now, turning the interior of the stove into something that looked less like a fire and more like a contained glow, steady and unnatural. I moved fast. There was a metal bucket beside the stove, half filled with ash and something darker beneath it. I grabbed it, swung the door open, and dumped the contents directly onto the burning logs. The reaction was instant. A sharp hiss, louder than it should have been, followed by a brief surge of steam that smelled wrong. Not like extinguished fire. Something sour, almost organic. The flames collapsed inward. Orange disappeared first, then the blue, leaving behind a bed of dark, faintly glowing coals that dimmed faster than any fire I'd ever seen. Within seconds, the stove was dead. The temperature in the room dropped with it. Not gradually, immediately, like something had been removed that the heat had been holding back. I stepped away from the stove, breathing heavier now, watching the metal door as if expecting it to move. It didn't. The cabin fell quiet. Not the same quiet as before. This one felt open, like something had just been allowed. Rule 8 didn't end with extinguishing the fire. It continued. Leave the cabin immediately. I turned toward the door, then stopped, because something else had changed. The windows. They weren't reflecting anymore. They were clear, and through them, movement. Not outside, inside the glass. Figures. Multiple, standing at different distances, layered behind the surface like depth had been added where there should have been none. All facing inward, watching. I felt my throat tighten. No, I said, shaking my head once. No, that's not. A sound cut me off. From the hallway. A soft click. Then another. Like doors opening one at a time. I turned slowly. The hallway was darker than it should have been. The light from the main room didn't reach as far anymore. It stopped short, leaving the far end in shadow. Something moved there. Not fast, not hiding. Stepping forward, into the edge of the light. It looked like me, at first. Same clothes. Then it took another step, and the proportions slipped. Arms slightly too long, fingers hanging lower than they should, head tilted at that same impossible angle I had seen in the reflection. It stopped at the entrance to the hallway, watching. Daniel, it said, my voice, but hollowed out, like something was speaking through it instead of using it. I backed toward the door, slowly, carefully, keeping it in my line of sight this time. The rule didn't say I couldn't look at it now, only before. My hand found the handle again. Cold, real. Behind me something tapped lightly against one of the windows. Then another. Then all of them. Soft, irregular contact, like fingers testing the surface from the other side. The figures in the glass didn't move closer, but they didn't need to. They were already there. I pulled the door open. The cold outside rushed in again, harsher this time, biting immediately through my clothes. I stepped out, didn't hesitate, didn't look back. The door closed behind me on its own. This time, I heard the latch click. The clearing was different. Again, wider now. The trees pulled back just enough to reveal more of the mountain beyond, a slope of dark shapes rising into a sky that had no stars. The footprints were still there. More of them now. Dozens, crossing over each other, circling, leading away in multiple directions. All of them too large, too deep. I stood at the base of the porch, trying to orient myself, trying to find the road. It wasn't visible. Not where it had been. Not anywhere. Daniel. The voice came from the cabin, from behind the door, then from the trees, then from directly beside me. Different tones, same voice, layered. I turned sharply to the side. Nothing there, but the air felt occupied. Close. I took a step forward into the clearing. The ground shifted slightly under my weight again. That same unstable give I had noticed earlier. Except now it felt thinner, less like soil, more like something covering something else. I looked down, for just a second, enough to see that the dirt wasn't uniform anymore. There were shapes beneath it, indented patterns, like impressions that had been filled in, not randomly, repeated. I stepped back immediately. "Nope," I muttered. My breath came out in visible bursts now, thicker than it should have been. Too cold, much colder than before. I looked up. The cabin windows were dark again. No reflections, no figures, just black. The door remained closed, but I could feel it, something on the other side, waiting. The rules had kept me alive so far. Every time I followed them, I stayed ahead of whatever this was. Every time I hesitated, it got closer. I forced myself to think, to go back through them. Fire, door, roof, windows, food. Voice, footprints, blue flame. Each one a piece of something larger. A pattern, a system. This place wasn't random. It was structured. That meant it had limits. It had rules for a reason. And if it had rules, it had boundaries. I turned slowly, scanning the clearing, the trees, the ground, looking for anything that didn't belong, anything that felt placed instead of grown. My eyes landed on something near the edge of the tree line. A post, wooden, half buried, leaning slightly to one side. I hadn't seen it before. I walked toward it carefully, avoiding the footprints as best I could. Each step deliberate, measured. The air grew colder as I moved away from the cabin, but also clearer, less occupied. I reached the post and brushed away some of the dirt covering it. There were markings carved into the wood, worn, faded, but still visible. A symbol I didn't recognize, and beneath it, words, barely legible. "Leave before it learns you." I stared at it, then looked back at the cabin. The door creaked open, slowly, on its own, and something inside leaned forward into the doorway, just enough for me to see its outline against the darkness, waiting for me to come back. I didn't go back. That wasn't a decision I made in the moment. It felt more like something I understood all at once, the way you understand you step too close to an edge without needing to look down. The cabin had been the center of everything since I arrived, the place the rules revolved around, the place that felt like safety as long as I followed them. But standing there, looking at the open door and the shape inside it, I realized something I should have seen earlier. The cabin wasn't protecting me. It was containing something. And whatever boundary existed there was starting to fail. The words on the post stayed in my head. "Leave before it learns you." Not hunts you, not finds you, learns you. I thought about the voice using my name, the way it shifted, adapted, tested different tones. The thing in the reflection matching my shape. The figure in the hallway wearing my proportions just slightly wrong. It wasn't just present, it was studying. I looked down at the footprints again, then beyond them into the trees. There was no clear path, but there didn't need to be. The only consistent thing since I arrived was this. Every time I followed the rules exactly as written, I survived. Every time I tried to interpret them loosely, things escalated. So I stopped trying to outthink them. I went back to what was actually written. Rule 7. If you notice footprints around the property in the morning, do not follow them. It wasn't morning. That mattered. The rules were specific with time. Exact when they needed to be. Which meant this wasn't that condition. And more importantly, it didn't say I couldn't avoid them. I stepped forward, carefully placing my foot in the untouched spaces between the prints. The ground still felt wrong beneath me, that thin, unstable layer shifting slightly with each step, but I kept moving. Behind me, The cabin door creaked wider. I didn't turn. "Daniel," the voice called again. Closer. Not from one place now, from several. Layered, slightly out of sync. I kept walking. Slow at first, then faster as the trees approached. The air changed again as I crossed the edge of the clearing. Colder, yes, but also quieter in a different way. The heavy watching silence from before was gone. This was emptier, less aware. I stepped between the first two trees and felt it immediately. A difference. Subtle, but real, like crossing an invisible line. Behind me, the voices stopped. Not faded, stopped. I paused, just for a second, then took another step deeper into the forest. Nothing followed. I waited. 5 seconds. 10. Still nothing. I exhaled slowly and kept moving. The forest wasn't easier to navigate than the clearing. If anything, it was worse. The trees were tightly packed, their trunks rising straight and tall, with branches that started too high to offer any guidance. The ground was uneven, covered in roots and shallow dips that made every step something I had to watch. But it was consistent. And right now, consistency was the closest thing I had to safety. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew where I wasn't staying. After about 10 minutes of walking, I noticed something else. The cold was fading. Not completely, but enough that my breath was no longer visible. Enough that my hands stopped shaking. I slowed my pace slightly, listening. Still nothing. No movement, no voices, no dragging along walls. Just the quiet of a normal forest. For the first time since I arrived, it felt like a place again. Not a system, not a structure, just trees. I kept moving for another 20 minutes before I saw the road. It didn't appear gradually, it was just there. A narrow strip of dirt cutting through the trees at a slight angle, exactly like it had been on the way in. I stopped at the edge of it, staring, half expecting it to disappear if I looked too directly. It didn't. I stepped onto it. The ground felt solid, stable, real. I turned once, just enough to look back the way I'd come. The trees stood still behind me. No clearing, no cabin, no sign that anything had ever been there. I didn't linger. I followed the road downhill. The walk took longer than it should have, or maybe it didn't. Time didn't feel reliable anymore. But eventually, I saw it. My car. Exactly where I'd left it. Untouched. I approached it slowly, half expecting something to be wrong. A door open. Glass broken. Something inside that hadn't been there before. There was nothing. I unlocked it, got in, and started the engine. The sound was louder than I remembered. Too loud. But normal. Completely normal. I pulled onto the road and didn't stop, didn't slow down, didn't look in the rearview mirror. Not once. The sign appeared again about 10 minutes later. Same leaning post, same faded paint. Northwind Access Road, no maintenance beyond this point. And beneath it, the carved warning. If you arrive after dark, do not continue. I drove past it without stopping. My phone picked up signal another 5 minutes down the road. 3 missed calls, 2 texts, all from my brother. The last one read, "Hey, not sure what's going on, but I just got a weird call from your number. Didn't sound like you. Call me back." I stared at the message longer than I should have. Then locked my phone and kept driving. I made it back to the city just after sunrise. Everything looked the same. Traffic, people, noise. Normal. Too normal. I went home, took a shower, and tried to sleep. I didn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the reflection. That slight delay. That smile that didn't belong to me. Around noon, I got up and went to the bathroom. I avoided the mirror at first. Not intentionally, just habit. Then I forced myself to look. My reflection looked back, tired, pale, but normal. I raised my hand. It raised its hand, perfectly in sync. I exhaled. Then I smiled. And for a fraction of a second,